think the government of the day implied that those who had gone out in very large numbers and created a significant fuss almost had the blessing of government, certainly not the opposition of government. The government should have been saying this is totally the wrong way to address a problem. Well, it's still very important, and I would hate to see anything happen to SBS that took it off the Australian scene. But one of the problems is that, you know, in these days in which people have said, you know, market economics, the market's got to determine outcomes, the market will decide what's good for us and what isn't. In that debate, you lose sight of the fact that there are many things a country has to do which the market will not do. The market won't support great artists, great singers, great dancers, great literature. These things need to be subsidized by governments. There are many things that a country needs to do that won't pay for itself on any sort of normal economic test. And you know, I believe governments had tried to say that, well, applying a bit to the ABC and as well as SBS, well, let the market determine whether the market wants it or not, and therefore go out and raise some funds yourself. Now, if SBS has to produce programs that are going to respond or attract sponsors, that takes it away from its original purpose. I believe it's time that governments stood up and said, you know, there are some things this country must do that economic rationalism, the markets, just will never fulfill. And SBS is one of those things. Get rid of Mugabe, get him out of office. A friend of mine who was president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, he started off as an army officer, but he fervently believed in democracy, that government was not something for generals. And he established two democracies actually in Nigeria. The first did not survive, the second has, with some blips certainly, but it has. He had tried to bring pressure to bear on Mugabe when President Mbeki was president of South Africa. But in that kind of operation, whenever he was trying to bring some weight to bear on Mugabe, Mbeki would support Mugabe. Now, to get Mugabe to change, it was absolutely critical that South Africa put pressure on Mugabe. Now, why Mbeki wouldn't is an open question. I don't believe the fact that Mugabe was a freedom fighter. Mbeki had been the bag carrier during the apartheid years, living in London, Lagos, or Lusaka, or somewhere, collecting money for the ANC. So he wasn't a freedom fighter himself. He hadn't done the hard yards in South Africa as somebody like Cyril Ramaphosa had done. Why he supported Mugabe, I don't know, because South Africa itself paid a very high price in terms of about 3 million people drifting across the border. The example of extraordinarily bad land policies, which made it harder to have sensible policies in South Africa. But Mugabe was not going to change because of white-faced pressure. He got beyond that. But if South Africa and Nigeria had led, every country in sub-Saharan Africa would have supported them. And then Mugabe would have had to change. And that would have been so healthy for Africa. I still believe that kind of pressure ought to be put to bear. And I think the so-called power-sharing arrangement, I regret it, and I think the international community was wrong to try and persuade Chandler to move into it, because it's really a farce. Mugabe has kept essential power in his own hands. And while that exists, the real problems of Zimbabwe are not going to be addressed. Well, we can help through enlightened aid policies, support with public service if they need special support for stability and all the rest. Well, then we have and should provide that. But it's going to be a long-haul operation. I think there are signs that the country is starting to get its act together. But Australian support, both material and in terms of personnel, I think will be needed for a very, very long while. I hate it being a political issue between the parties. Having a tough view on border protection and whatever, and making that the political divide is very bad for Australia internationally. It reminds people of Tampa, when it first became a major political issue, and the government tried to get rid of some of the worst aspects of Howard policy, but sometimes the government, today's government, seems to be saying, look, we're just as tough as Howard was. At other times they're trying to say, look, no, we're compassionate. So it's got a bit of a two-headed policy, and the opposition is consistently saying that, you know, the government's lost control of our borders, which is a sheer and absolute nonsense, an absolute nonsense. There will be asylum seekers while conditions remain as they are in countries from which they come, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Sri Lanka or some other place where there is great civil disturbance. We can't solve those problems alone. We can perhaps contribute to it by enlightened international action. And we can't solve it alone by agreements between Indonesia and Australia. I would be surprised if Indonesia does not believe that we're trying to solve the problem by pushing it all onto Indonesia. And that, of course, is a policy that is not going to work and ultimately could lead to quite severe tension between ourselves and Indonesia. The policies we had in place with Indo-Chinese refugees worked really in the 70s because we had a government saying we have an ethical responsibility to take people, while Mr. Whitlam had initially opposed. When my government said, no, we will accept, Gough Whitlam did not make a political issue of it. He did not oppose it, and I think very much to his credit, although Bob Hawke tried to from the union movement to an extent. But that wasn't a material factor. So you need bipartisanship, but also it worked in the 70s because when holding centres were established in Malaysia in particular, but I think also in Indonesia, you knew that not only we, Australia, but Canada and the United States were going to take very, very large numbers. So Malaysia wasn't going to be left holding the problem with a very, very large number of people that really could not accommodate. So there was a wider international agreement, but not so wide that you had to go on arguing and talking indefinitely, but wide enough to contribute to a solution of the problem. I think we need that kind of broader approach today. I don't see any sign so far that's been embraced by the government. It seems more to be an Australia-Indonesian discussion. But I think other people we should be trying, both of us, to involve other people, especially countries that have traditionally taken asylum seekers. I met a lass yesterday who came here at the age of 9 or 10 in 1979 from Vietnam. And she's a member for the Liberal Party, I think, for Cabramatta. Well, I think it's very good that people who come here from other places that are quite different, whose history and culture are different, stand for Parliament and try and participate, because I think some of the different communities in Australia have not done as much as perhaps they could do to try and make sure that Australia keeps an open and compassionate view. The people who have participated in the argument have been more old-stream traditional politicians, whether from the left or the right. You know, I was delighted to see this lass yesterday, especially as she was a member of the Liberal Party. And the Liberal Party has not been good at reaching out the different ethnic communities.